Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about clean tech and climate tech, my mind jumps straight to the big stuff. Wind farms, solar farms, batteries, and grids. But most of the progress in this industry actually happens on a much more rudimentary scale, with small teams working hard to get half-formed ideas off the ground and into physical products, working with limited time, limited money, and hardly any certainty. In this episode of Clean Talk, we're talking about what it really takes to build something that works, where in clean tech and climate tech, the complexity of a project can be significant and the cost of getting it wrong, high. We get into why so many startups stall or fail quietly, how perfectionism kills momentum, why done is often better than perfect, and what it really means to build stuff that matters, not just that looks good in a pitch deck. We dive deep into the internal battles that startup teams often face and explore just how challenging it can be to keep separate your sense of identity and self-worth from the outcomes of your business venture as a founder. And towards the end of this conversation, we're actually going to zoom out a bit and explore the parallels between hardware product development and something a little bit closer to home for me, looking at media production and the creator economy, dissecting how building startups and building creative work often share the same tensions around iteration, vulnerability, the importance of confidence, and the vitality of putting imperfect work out into the world. This episode will be of particular interest to you if you are in the trenches of the startup game at the moment, if you've been working on a product and you feel like you've hit a bit of a dead end, or if you're just curious to know about the challenges that entrepreneurs face in the hardware development process and how humility, self-awareness, and principle affect success. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to Clean Talk, the podcast shining a spotlight on inspiring professionals and organizations across the world of renewable energy, clean technology, and sustainability. Today, I'm joined by Matt Stedman. Now, Matt works with startups to help them build their minimum viable product and take it to market. And of course, some of that in the tech space is within climate tech. And so today we're going to be exploring some of the work and insights that he's taken away from working with different climate startups and ones outside of the space as well. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. We go back a little bit.
We do, yeah.
We've been working on a mission or a brand film for a climate tech startup called Tech, which you provided fractional CTO services to, if I remember.
Yeah, this was what, 6 months ago, that sort of time. That was really, really good fun. That was one of the sort of earliest stage startups that we'd actually worked with. And we only do the fractional stuff with like really early stage startups. But that's exactly when they need that sort of, oh my God, this is also scary. How do we actually turn this crazy idea into a reality?
Yeah.
And working with them was just so much fun. And then we got to meet you out of it as well. So that was perfect.
Yeah. This is what I'm so excited to chat to you about is there's a few overlapping areas that I just find really cool. One is foundership, entrepreneurship, and the startup scene, which I know you have a lot to comment on and a lot of insights to share, which I'm excited for. The other is physical products. I feel like in the age of AI and software, we're losing the rose-tinted glasses for the actual tangible things we can hold, things we can use. And so I'd love to get back to brass tacks and just talk about what it means to build physical products and why that's so important. Let's just go back. What's led you to this place of owning your company, being in a technical career? How did you find yourself here?
When I left uni, I did engineering at uni. When I left that, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to be something technical, engineer or something like that. But I didn't know what I wanted to be. And the idea of corporate world kind of didn't really appeal.
Yeah.
Especially engineering corporate, because any engineers that are watching that are in corporate, big UK companies or otherwise, it's a bit grey at times. It can be very exciting, but it can be a bit grey. So from there, I actually went and worked at the Sony Innovation Fund. So Sony, the guys that make PlayStation, probably some of your cameras as well.
Yeah. I wish. Yeah, we're on Black Magic at the moment, but Sony should be an upgrade.
Okay, so next year. But they have an innovation fund, which is a VC. It's a fund that invests in startups. And I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do, but there are some people out there in the UK and in Europe that do know what they want to do.
Yeah.
And I, maybe could direct some of Sony's money into those things that I think are important that they're excited about too.
Yeah.
VC world isn't for me, so I only lasted there for about 8 months, but I got the bug of working with startups, talking to them and thinking about things in that sort of way. Over the course of 10 or so years from that point onwards to where we are now, I work with startups in a number of different capacities, which I'm sure we can dive into if you'd like to. But fundamentally, the thing that I sort of kept finding was that there are some startups that are incredibly passionate about the problem that they're solving. Climate tech is, or climate change and climate impact is a big part of that, of course. There are those that have a really keen attention to that problem, and there are those that are incredibly technically good at building something, but they're not always the same people. And I loved the energy of those people, and I loved speaking and working with those people.
Yeah.
And I figured, okay, can I build a company where I get to be that person, work with those people if they've got a tech team, if they've got a CTO as well, supporting them, but also encouraging all of those people to really build stuff that matters to them.
Yeah.
So my sort of unofficial tagline is build stuff that matters.
Fantastic. With the startup scene, I'm sure you've worked with lots of different kinds of characters in your time. And I feel like the startup scene is almost like an undiluted microcosm for like some of the challenges that play out later down a company's kind of like path of development. What do you observe in the startup scene, and what do you find interesting?
The most human element that I see is that in most corporate professional jobs, even if you're chummy with your co-workers and you go for pints after work, whatever it is, they're still your co-workers and maybe your friends. But a lot of entrepreneurs and early people in early stage startups, the first 10 or so people, they spend so much time together that they are more than just friends. They're sort of like siblings that sometimes love, sometimes hate each other.
Yeah.
Especially those first like 2 or 3 people in a company. It's like, they say something about with founders, it's basically marriage, to that extent.
Yeah.
And also how you approach, and that's the relationship that people have with each other, but also the relationship that people have with their jobs. You and I were talking about this before, of when you work, it doesn't feel like work. It's so much fun. I love getting out the soldering iron, getting the 3D printer on, building some cool stuff, or speaking with technical people that know way more than me about a certain subject, or don't know as much about a certain area, but need to know because it's part of their business, or it's going to be. And having those sort of techie conversations, I get so much energy from that, to the extent that I'll be working at 11 p.m. and, my parents or my partner or my friends or whoever I'm with, or someone will point out like, dude, switch off. And I'm like, go play a video game, be normal. I'm like, I'll go do something like this and be normal. And I'll be like, this is fun. I'd like to do this.
This is fun.
And again, not everyone does the 9 to 5, but those people that, there are people that love their job, but do the 9 to 5. Would you do it for free? And they say no. I don't know about you, but for the first couple of months, at least with hard stuff, I did it for free, to at least some good degree. Yeah. And at no point did I really, and this was probably a bad thing, but at no point did I really think I should probably start making money at some point. I did eventually, of course. But the first few months I was like, God, this is so much fun. Yeah. Oh, I need a job. And then I turned it into a job. And you see that a lot with, the entrepreneurs that do build stuff that matters, build stuff that matters to them. I don't want to tell people what matters as a whole, but what matters to them. And I also see it with the entrepreneurs that that aren't building something that really matters to them. They are the ones that will switch off at 5 o'clock because it's just a job for them, Yeah. Or that when things get tough, or S hits the F, they decide, okay, it's probably time to take a couple of weeks off, or to focus on something else, or to look for another job. And I have not looked for a job since 4 months before starting this company. And most founders, I think, in that capacity feel the same way. They wouldn't have dreamed looking for a job. Yeah. And there are some founders that will look for a job every 6 months when times get tough. Right. And it really differentiates that. And what's really interesting is you can normally tell those people apart in about 7 seconds when you first meet them.
Fascinating. So what you're observing in the startup scene is that you can kind of work out character fast, and you see a big contrast between people who are in it because they believe in it essentially, or have a passion beyond just a proficiency, versus those who kind of treat it more as a career, work to live rather than live to work, right? Yeah, precisely. Yeah. Loads of brilliant people have categorized in different ways. Like there's, Simon Sinek did start with why. That was a really famous one, the Golden Circle. There's this sort of bastardized, because we don't use it correctly, Japanese proverb called ikigai, right? Which people talk about as well, but I don't think we use it in the right way. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. Okay. But it sort of falls all into that category of like, you can tell when, as you say, it's not just work to live. It's I'm Matt the engineer who gets to do this, as opposed to an employee who does it because I get to go home early or whatever it is. Yeah. When you're working with startups, what framework or approach or blueprint, however you word it, do you use to provide value? Like, what does it look like to work with hard stuff on a project? It's case by case, as you can imagine. There's no one size fits all. It's a very generic, high level roadmap with obviously lots of technical elements to it that we share with everyone that will read it, basically. And every single startup that we've worked with have seen it at some point. And it basically tracks the steps that you would go through. And they follow on with like the viral canvas, and they follow on the
TRLs, technology readiness levels, which lots of startups will use if they're in a tech environment.
So these are sort of frameworks that those listening in the startup scene will already be familiar with.
They're sort of technical frameworks, that help people get to where they, like basically like evaluate, okay, where am I actually at? Like SMART goals, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Actually evaluate, okay, realistically, where am I actually at this moment in time? From a technical perspective or a customer perspective, to actually work with startup, as again, it really does depend. But if it's we talked about UR Tech at the beginning. Someone like that is with Olivia, it was so early on that she had a bit of a technical team, but they were all quite young engineers. The problem was clearly defined, but there were a million different ways to tackle the solution.
Okay.
But they'd married quite early on to a solution. And sometimes we come in as, you've thought about one idea. Let's
challenge them.
Peel back a little bit, look at the problem and come up with all the crazy ideas as well. We might end up going with your idea, but at least there's context.
Yes.
And so few startups do that. Most startups actually go, this is the solution. Now, where is the problem?
Yeah.
Versus flipping it. It's really hard to flip it because people were creative, especially entrepreneurs are creative. They like a solution. And actually, when they find out that they're, a question we always ask startups, would you change your solution to better match your problem, or would you change your problem to better match the solution?
Right. And is there a right answer to this question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If they say they would rather change their problem to match their solution, we don't work with them, right? Because either they're so smart, because this somewhat applies to ideas that come out of PhDs, for example. This is the only way to grow crystals on this substrate. Where could this be useful? Scientifically, there is no other way of doing it. So that's kind of where a solution kind of can't change. You're met with physics or chemistry or something like that. But in 99% of entrepreneurial cases, you need to, again, it's that build stuff that matters. You need to believe that problem is a problem so deeply in your core that you will do anything to solve it. That's when you're going to be successful.
Yeah.
Because that's when you will endure the hard times. That's when you'll come up with new ideas. That's when you'll put everything on the line to make sure that problem goes away, and people will pay for that problem to go away. And that's what we call a business.
Yeah. There's a real challenge in that, though. One, it takes an incredible amount of humility to be able to do that and be receptive to it throughout the development of your product itself. So, you know, as you're saying with Tech, coming up with a solution, or, putting features together or whatever that might solve the problem, but then, confronting, are we actually solving the right problem or whatever?
But to compound that, one of the things I said was it does take, like, you can't always, but sometimes you can tell within about 7 seconds if someone's going to be like a really good entrepreneur or founder.
Right.
And it's 7 seconds. I use that as a sort of like a joking number because it means something else in some ways, but like it is often quite immediate and obvious. And we're a small enough company that we can kind of pick and choose who we work with at times. So we can just be, honestly, I don't think you're the right person for this. And the most humble entrepreneurial people are the ones that go, oh, you're right. Actually, this isn't solved by me being an entrepreneur. This is solved by me applying that entrepreneurialism into a corporate, another company that's doing it, a rival startup that's doing it better, or that's got a better leg up. And I want to clarify, this is all like the first week of us getting to know a startup. Yeah. Obviously, I've not really talked about so far. What we actually do is the engineering and the R&D. And I do want to cycle back to that. We do that approach. We get to the minimum viable product. We actually build stuff as we go. But likewise, we ourselves will hold ourselves to that account when we're working with startups of, okay, cool. This is the first way that I think we can solve this problem. Given that it might not be the right way because there are millions of solutions out there, how can we get there as fast as possible? And that's the minimum aspect of minimum viable product.
So again, there's two aspects. It takes an immense amount of humility to be able to confront whether or not you're solving the right problem as an entrepreneur. But it also takes quite a flexible skill set. Like you were saying, you got to take the entrepreneurial skill set and then apply it in a different way, or be open to the idea of doing that. Yeah. That's got to be quite challenging. If you've gone into something because you're an expert in, let's say, robotics or something, and you're like, I think there's a problem here whose solution is robotics or something related to that. If you then find out that the problem doesn't actually have robotics as a solution, how do you, I guess, navigate working out, how you reapply your entrepreneurial broader skill set in a different context, if that's the right move for you personally?
Well, so this is more like what would I advise an entrepreneur in that scenario, right? As opposed,
Because
we will do this, but this is not what we're paid to do.
Yeah.
We're not paid to tell people bad news. But we do tell people bad news all the time, basically. It's funny you use that example because the example that we always give, and I've probably said this story about a million times to a million different people, is plastic on the beach. If there's plastic on the beach and someone comes along and says, I'm going to build a robot that cleans up all the plastic on the beach. And you go, oh, brilliant. You're a roboticist. That's a really good way of getting plastic off the beach. How do we stop the plastic from getting on the beach in the first place?
Yeah.
And it could be nets in the sea. It could be catches on the river. It could be designing biodegradable plastics that don't go in there. It could be solving single-use plastic in the first place. And all of a sudden, solving single-use plastic in the first place is either, chemistry or biochemistry, or it's policy, but it's probably not robotics.
Exactly.
I'm not saying, well, your PhD in robotics is, great, but go learn policy because it's the only way you're actually going to solve this problem. But there does take a level of, okay, maybe building a robot to take the plastic off the beach isn't the best solution in this context. I mean, it might well be depending on the context, but go with me on this example.
Yeah.
Okay, going back to that bastardized use of Ikigai, well, what can you do about it using your skill set? And it might be, okay, well, actually, there is a company that's doing bioplastics that actually they need someone to help out with the manufacturing lines to make it more automated. And all of a sudden, they need a roboticist.
Yeah.
Some of it is exploring these sort of tangential routes to actually get to where you really want to be.
Yeah.
What you can really do. And again, it's the exact same thing with startups is they have their initial solution, but sometimes you do need to sort of branch around and caveat and take a more systems level, macro level approach of what are actually all the parts at play here? What are the other ways that we can solve this? And you might actually stumble on not the local minima, but the global minima, the absolute goal that actually makes it work in the long run.
So we've explored this really challenging process that you have to engage with to provide the best service, but in that kind of early stage of qualifying your lead, essentially, is this someone we can help within the context of fractional CTO and so forth? Once you've gone beyond that and they're a good fit and we're past this kind of this phase, what does it look like to engage with a startup at that point?
The thing that we actually do, or the thing that we actually deliver, or we at least aim to deliver, is the MVP, the minimum viable product. And loads of startups will have heard this. And, even non-startups, I think, will have heard this.
Yeah.
This term. I think everyone uses it wrong or sort of doesn't use it to its fullest extent. Doesn't give it the grandiose term that it actually deserves. And what I mean by that is whenever a startup says, oh, we are building our MVP, unless someone's put money down for it, you're not. You're building an MV something. But unless money changes hands for it, I don't think it's a product yet, is it? Like, you've made something cool. You made a really good prototype. But unless someone's bought it or pledged to buy it, it's not a product. Unless you've tested it in the field and it actually solves the problem, plastic actually gets removed from the beach or whatever it is, is it actually viable? And if you couldn't have got there faster or cheaper, and you actually went on other tangents, or you threw loads of features at it that it doesn't actually need, or it's not giving people paper cuts, but they still need it, so they still want it, unless it's not doing those things, is it actually minimum? And I think so many startups, and this applies especially to hardware startups. I see this all the time, where they've got this roadmap to build something, cool and crazy and really helpful, but fundamentally beautiful with all these extra features. And it's going to take them a year, and they've got to build 1,000 units before they can launch. And there's a time and place for that. But then when it hits the shelves, no one buys it. And you ask them, well, did anyone buy your MVP? Did anyone buy a prototype off you when they saw it and said, I know it gives me paper cuts. I know it sucks. I know its battery life is 5 minutes, but I need it because it solves my problem. My hair's on fire and I need it right now.
Yeah.
Here's some money. That's your MVP. And unless that happened, how do you know that you're actually building the right sort of thing? And hardware startups fail on their first launch all the time because of this issue.
What are the most common, playing outs of it failing?
The starkest and the easiest is a sudden and emergent realization that you've built something that no one wants and you've got thousands of units of stock that no one's buying. The sadder and often more common thing is over the course of 5 to 10 years, you keep pushing on your startup and some units come off the shelves, but they don't really sell. It doesn't go off wildfire. And then you kind of give up. And flip that with people clamoring at the door and you having an order backlog of so many units because it's really solving a problem that people really empathize with. And I'm not saying that like it's easy. I'm not saying, it's that it will be the case for everyone. And some things, big containerized anaerobic digesters you might only make, especially in your first few years, one or two a year. You don't need a backlog of 1,000 units. But, you do need market conviction to sort of prove it. Your root question was, so what do we actually do? Me and my team were really good engineers. So what does it actually look like when we're building those MVPs? Is we focus on iteration,
Okay.
because again, at least the P part, the product part, is based on someone eventually going, okay, now I'll buy it.
Yeah. So when you say iteration there, what you're saying is doing developing something bit by bit and constantly testing that it's moving in the right direction. Is that right?
The constantly testing it's moving in the right direction is a really key part of that, because engineers love to do this, where they keep making it, in their mind, better, faster, more efficient, sexier, more polished, whatever it is. But yeah, unless you're putting it in a customer's hands, how do you know it's moving in the right direction?
Got it.
Or testing it. You're either doing the P part or the V part. You're either testing it from a viability perspective or you're testing it from a product perspective. You give it to your target customer.
Yep.
And you say, this is how much it costs, and buy it.
And see if they do.
And if they do buy it, congratulations. And if they don't buy it, you've still got something wrong.
Sure.
The difficult part comes in, every startup should have an alpha community. And an alpha community, it's a sort of macho term, but basically it just means like the first few people, the really early believers and the early adopters to, oh my God, this thing I really need.
It's almost like a focus group.
But you're not trying to gauge the general populace. You're trying to gauge the people with the problem that you're trying to help.
Mm-hmm.
And they might love the solution, but they need to love the problem just as much as you do. So if you're building something that affects farmers, for example, you go and you fill that community with farmers. It might be a robotics tool. You might have some roboticists with you, and chatting with, but fundamentally, until a farmer buys it, you've not built it.
Yeah.
You've not built the MVP. Unless it removes CO2 from the atmosphere, or unless it stops someone from putting more CO2 in the atmosphere, same thing. As I said, what we do is this whole engineering approach, systems approach, building stuff that actually gets there as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we do is we build one-off versions of something with the intent to iterate. And that's a very different engineering mindset to building or designing something for mass manufacture. It's called DFM, designing for manufacture, where you're going to build hundreds of thousands of millions of units of something. That requires a different sort of skill of engineering that I can't really do very well.
If I understand it correctly, it's not that is a completely separate process. The MVP might be further up the river from getting to a point where you can mass produce your product, right? But it's knowing the stage you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you said earlier on was this broad technical and non-technical skill set that you have to have to be an entrepreneur, and also just to be a CTO of startups. Again, it's why we're often a fractional CTO to a CTO. There is this sort of mentality of, again, if you take someone that's worked in robotics for 20 years, they are brilliant at robotics, but all of a sudden when you tell them to make a prototype of something, or to make a prototype where robotics will touch it, but now you need to start speaking to people that don't understand robotics, or now you need to start, if it's a farmer, they don't care what sort of, driver motor you're using, a servo motor, they just care, okay, but my cows are escaping from the field, or the methane is polluting the environment, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the CTOs that we meet don't often have that. The CEOs often get silos, believing that they've got the solution and they've been told by their investors that you need to launch in the next year, or you need to keep iterating. And iterating isn't 1%, 2% marginal improvements on your current design. Sometimes it is throwing everything out and starting again. How can I solve this problem in a different way?
Right.
Or at least having the, as you say, humility early on to say, put a pin on this, save it, don't throw it away, but save it, put it in a drive somewhere, and let's see if we can come up with a whole different solution to this. And then what could we take away from that solution and combine it to our old stuff, or vice versa? And I think so few startups actually do that, because it feels like there's so much investment, so much time to build the MVP that they don't try building multiple variants, multiple routes.
Yeah.
And those are the startups that don't work.
It takes so much of you and from you and resources to be able to just get to that point. It's kind of scary to explore other options, because you're like, I've invested so much into this.
Yeah, it's sunk cost fallacy. The idea that you've put in so much time and effort into something, it would be a complete waste of time to try something else, or I've put so much time into it that at the very least it'd be a shame to try something else.
Yeah.
Again, if you love the problem so much, and if you love what you do, and you love the future it might bring, both to you and the people that you serve and the planet and that sort of thing, and you've been at it for 2 years, and it might be 2 grueling years, but you might be doing this in 20 years' time. surely it takes, it takes a bit of humility, but surely it's a bit worth it to say, okay, let's take a month or a week or even a couple of afternoons this week to just pin that and see about this other area. See what we can do. And we're not here to distract people for the sake of it, but sometimes this is what we do with startups. We go, great, you've got a solution, but clearly it hasn't worked, otherwise you wouldn't have hired us. Let's try a different approach and see what we can learn from that. The other thing that I would say, and this is maybe just a tidbit, is that we encourage failure a lot because failure is how you learn, right? And this could be failed prototypes, failed ideas, failed MVPs, failed launches, whatever it is. But I think the average entrepreneur, the average person fears failure. They fear rejection from their customers. They fear sunk costs, spending too much time on something. They fear getting it wrong, being, humiliated or a humbling moment of going, oh, actually, I didn't know this industry as well as I did. Or as well as I thought I did.
Yeah.
But this whole approach of, the best founders, and again, it's that 7 seconds thing, it's that early stage thing of if they can laugh at themselves and go, that was stupid. Okay, how can I leverage that? And they're the ones that are constantly, continuously learning and applying that and taking that failure, again, test, experiment, whatever it was, and applying it to the next version. And then the next version, it's actually better. It's not an iteration, the 2%. It's an iteration, a new approach or a rejuvenated approach. Again, those are the ones that are successful.
So we just talked about the humility it takes to go back to proverbial square one drawing board and appreciate that isn't actually starting from scratch because you have learned stuff through the previous iteration process. Talk to us about maybe a couple of examples of working with different startups to just illustrate how this plays out and what a success story looks like in the CTO space.
Where I think we differ from many other engineering consultancies is that it's quite common in engineering consultancies to sort of throw the problem over the fence. They build the solution. They build the PCB or the printed circuit board or the electronics or the enclosure, or they build something. They build what you ask them to build. They throw it back and say, how is it? Which is fine. And for design for manufacture, that's kind of what you want. You kind of just want the experts to get on with it, and then the boffins can come back with the answers.
Yeah.
But we don't tend to work like that. We tend to do much sort of tighter sprints, 2 or 3 weeks. Because again, what can you achieve in 2 or 3 weeks? Mm-hmm. One of the questions we always ask, especially those startups that I mentioned that are like raising £1 million to build their MVP.
Yeah.
I always ask them, okay, what could you do with £1,000? And they go, well, like nothing. Like it's £1,000. Okay, and don't think, like agricultural shipping container, but do think, little electronics device. And you say, like, have you built anything yet? No. Okay, well, you need these components. Okay, that's £250. And you need to spend an afternoon hacking it together, see if it makes sense, just to see if it sort of solves the problem. So that's £750 left over for beer and cookies. Like, what could you do with that? What could you do with it? And sometimes they'll go, no, it needs to be perfect. And again, that's not the right person. Or maybe they need to sort of reframe their approach. But sometimes it is, we've won contracts that way by saying, I tell you what, I reckon I could do something in 2 or 3 weeks that illustrates your idea. It will work. It will give you paper cuts. It will be nasty. It will not be the finished product. But put it in front of a client or a customer, I should say.
Yep.
Put it in front of one of your customers and ask them for money. And not very many people take us off on that, but sometimes they do. And we actually did have one before where it was a gas sensing technology to detect a type of gas that is used to cool down electrical grid infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that leaks like crazy and it's terrible for the environment. And they were 8 months in, a couple of £100,000 worth of funding so far, going for the next raise, hadn't built a single thing. And I spoke to the CTO, and he was really, really smart guy, really capable engineer, probably better than me in every capacity, but hadn't yet built anything because he knew how difficult it would be to get it right.
Right.
And a phrase that I often use, and I think I've stolen this from a previous company, I'm not sure, but is done is better than perfect.
Yeah, I love that phrase, yeah.
And he was so convinced it had to be perfect that he just didn't get anything done. So again, I said to them, give me this budget, and I'm basically just going to front the material cost because it's going to cost me nothing. And they said, it's not going to cost you nothing. It's going to cost me nothing. And I'm going to build something for you. And then we're going to show it to a client. And I took an Arduino, which is like a cheap bit of electronics that kids can play with.
Yeah.
Some professionals, of course, but the point is kids can play with it.
Yeah.
Pipe that into Airtable. And Airtable is something that many entrepreneurs use. It's basically Excel on steroids, which, and there's a free tier. Couple of sensors. One of them was a sensor for that gas that they were trying to detect. It wasn't anywhere near as precise as they needed it, but it did detect that gas, yes or no, at least binary enough information.
Yeah.
Wired that all together, IoT device, and slapped it into a cardboard box. I did that in about 2 days. And then I gave it to them and they said, well, obviously we can't sell this, but I sort of get the idea. This is technically our first prototype. And I was like, yeah, you've been going for 8 months. You've raised like 250 grand. And this, which I built yesterday, is like the closest thing. And that sort of mentality, we do a lot in that sometimes a blank canvas is so scary that they don't build a thing. Sometimes it's far easier to be shown something that's right but wrong, or just plain wrong, because it's so easy to correct.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to invent. So I know some of what we do is, okay, can we just build something to get us in the right direction? We talked about iteration, constant iteration. It's really difficult to iterate from 0, but as soon as you get to 1 or even 0.01, you can start to iterate from there. And a good chunk of what we do is with that. That's one example. Another example is a company that we're working with at the moment.
Just reflecting on that one for a moment.
Yeah.
So you've got a company, they've raised investment, they've got a smart group of people. You almost want to break the spell of perfectionism and get something off the ground.
Again, it's that idea of solution versus problem. And when you're married to the solution, or at the very least, when you're convinced you've got the right solution, the solution becomes your baby. And no one wants to be told their baby is anything other than perfect.
Yeah.
Even if it's a completely made up ethereal baby that doesn't yet exist and you need more funding. But that's where the sort of perfectionism and the perfect product or the perfect idea comes into play. Achieving that perfection first time round isn't just unlikely. It's statistically impossible. It's just impossible. And the rationale behind that is because as you start building, you realize, oh, this part's more complicated, or this part's easier, or this part's different, or there's another way of doing this, and you get ideas by doing. Everyone often gets ideas by building, right? They understand the process.
Start and then get inspired, as opposed.
Inspire yourself as you go.
Yeah.
And we talked about this a little bit before actually, but it was like this learning by doing, and you get better at it. Or sort of by teaching yourself, and by learning the second subject, you get better at the first subject, sort of thing. And if you keep waiting and getting your ducks lined up in a row, or whatever the phrase is, before you build anything, then when you get to build it, all you've really done is kick the can down the road. And this sort of hops back to one of your earlier questions, but we work generally with 2 broad types of clients. The really early stage ones that haven't yet built anything, and they're either bright enough to know that they need some extra support, or they're scared enough to build and they've not built anything yet. Or we do a fair amount of work with later stage startups in a sort of skunkworks capacity. Sometimes that's building their first actual MVP after a pivot. A tagline we used to use, don't use anymore, is master of the pivot. Or it's, okay, this first product went really, really well, but now we're a corporate and we sort of need some of that startup energy back.
Yeah.
We're working with 2 companies at the moment, both Series B sort of stage startups, one actually in the UK and one in the US. And it's all about, okay, how can we recapture some of that energy?
Yeah.
And go back to that idea of, okay, now we've got funding and we can move faster and we can do more stuff, but we do want to see what we can do with £1,000 rather than with £1 million.
Yeah.
And we iterate on that, and then the budgets do go up and we can build more and more crazy stuff, and it's great fun. We get to get more people involved, but it all starts with that. Okay, what can we do with, in the minimum sense, what can we do, and what's the greatest bang for your buck that you can get from a technical perspective, but also from a team perspective. And of course, we're talking about hardware, but all modern hardware, or nearly all of it, does have software. So we can do the hardware side of it, which is obviously the physical, electronics, the mechanical, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, about 50% of the people that we work with, the team and that sort of thing, are software people, be it firmware or cloud, or half the things we do are IoT, so connectivity, cloud, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we do need to integrate that as well.
For the startups listening in, some will be able to relate to things and be going, oh, that's me. Others will point at something else and think, oh, that perfectionism, I can relate to that. What tools do you want to point people to? What questions do you want to provoke in them to ask themselves about where they're at with their startup, to help those listening in that are, trying to get something off the ground?
In the year 2000, it was a British rower, won the Olympics. First time, I think, since 1912 or something like that a UK athlete had won the Olympics rowing championship. And when asked about it in all the interviews, he'd always say, literally like plastered on the side of the training room, was, does it make the boat go faster?
And that was like the mantra behind any change he made in his training approach, right?
Yeah, like, do I eat this meal or this meal? Do I do this training on this day? Do I get extra rest on this day? Do I go out for this? Do I do this exercise versus this exercise? And like made that into his core belief, right?
Yeah.
It's really stuck with me, this idea of, whenever you're doing, again, if the startup, the entrepreneurial thing is for you, and you are going to build something that you are going to be stuck doing for 10, 20 years and is now going to be kind of part of your core identity, every decision that you make, to the extent of meals and stuff like that, going out and whatever, with a healthy balance, of course, we're all human, but it does have to sort of play into this, always put it through the lens of, does it make my boat go faster?
Okay. So what you're suggesting, if I'm understanding it right, is that startup founders be really strict with themselves when they're in decision-making processes to make sure that, this has to be a must. This has to be serving one key clear goal for me to do it. Otherwise, it could just be a meander or a waste of time.
These are all sort of like flips of the same coin, as it were. Because another way of phrasing it is, as you sort of just did, was must have, should have, and nice to have.
Right.
And when you've got no resource and no team and no time, it's only do the must haves. And then when you've got a little bit more time and free time, whatever, then you can do some of the should haves, because that will help it sell or whatever. And then you do the nice to haves when you don't know what you're going to do with the rest of your time.
Sure.
By and large. Or when you want to relax and the nice to have is fun, which sometimes it is. And again, we do that with all of our clients. When we're sort of, if it's designing an MVP that we're going to build with them over the next 3 or 4 weeks, or if it's helping them on a technical roadmap of, we're not actually building anything, but like with fractional CTO work where we sort of advise, all right, this is what we think you should be doing.
Yeah.
It's always sort of based on a question-led approach rather than you do this. But it is always, okay, so what are your must-haves? What is absolutely a must-have to make this idea work? And sometimes that's a technical thing. It must have 450 milliamp hour battery. Or sometimes it must solve the problem. It should be written. And if that's actually not on the list, we normally put that up there because people don't put it on the list. And again, it's that whole sort of, does it actually solve the problem? Does it make the boat go faster?
Yeah.
A third way of thinking about it, and again, it's the same thing, and it's a tool that we use all the time, is hell yes or hell no. And hell yes and hell no, but it is literally as it sounds. When you've got a big decision in front of you, or a small decision, but it works really well for hell yes, for big decisions. Hiring is a famous one.
Yeah.
If you come away from that hiring call, or if you come away from that purchasing decision on that customer, if you're on a diet and you see a brownie, unless it's hell yes, for these sorts of critical decisions, it's hell no. Again, when you've got so little time, resource, you really want to stick to the minimum.
Yeah.
It's almost a game of how many things can you say no to and still move forwards.
That's a fascinating way of framing it. And one that is probably quite uncomfortable, but honestly important.
When you've got a limited amount of time and you're trying to stay in that minimum framework. I mean, we talked about minimum viable product, but fundamentally, when you're a startup especially, it's minimum viable time as well. It's minimum everything. It becomes a very worthy game of how many things can you say no to, not just how many things can you say yes to.
Yeah.
There's this other idea of I think maybe we talked about it before, I can't remember, but like perfectionism isn't when you can't add anything more, it's when you can't take anything more away. And that's the definition of an MVP in a curious way, is that we couldn't have solved this with any fewer features, because if we did, it wouldn't have worked. But any extra feature we put on top of that, it's no longer the minimum. We spent time doing something that actually didn't, it might have influenced a decision, but it didn't change a decision of a customer. And it's the exact same thing with your limited resource, time, budget, whatever it is, in the startup world of, okay, if we didn't do this exercise, if we didn't do this thing, if we didn't do this feature, if we didn't, whatever it is, we didn't do this part, would we still be solving the problem? Would we still launch something, a product, service, whatever it is that solves the problem? Would we still be making the world better? Would we still be doing something that matters to us to the same efficacy or greater? And it can be a bit cut and dry. It can be a bit cold. But if the answer is, yeah, I think if we scrap that thing, we'd actually still get there in the same time frame or better. Then it's a distraction, right? And it's that hell yes, hell no.
Fantastic. We've talked a lot about the humility that's required to engage with the entrepreneurial process and the MVP journey successfully. Quite nicely in tandem with that, I guess as a character value of entrepreneurship comes purpose and being purpose driven. When we look at specifically startups within the climate and clean tech space, what Can you just tell me about some cool and interesting products that you maybe have seen or have heard about, to get really specific about what people are building out there at the moment?
Yeah.
And just more observations about, the challenges that companies within this niche face in their MVP journey.
Yeah. No doubt, you of all people will know very well that the problem that we face with climate isn't one problem. It's about a million different little problems all combined together. When people think I'm a climate startup or whatever it is, they're thinking, oh, cool, they make solar panels or they deploy renewable off-grid or whatever it is. And that is really cool. That's really exciting. But that is where often it requires government-backed or at least corporate-backed finance. It's huge teams. You might invent something really cool in this space. There are people that are putting, to balance the grid, they're putting huge battery centers basically outside towns so that they can basically minimize the reliance on huge energy surges throughout the grid.
Yeah.
It makes renewables also more exciting if you've got battery storage locally, because you can have renewables locally as well.
Yeah. So what you're saying there is the battery storage solves a number of problems. One is the volatility of the supply from renewable assets. Wind blows at some point, and sometimes it doesn't. And sun shines at some point, sometimes it doesn't. And the grid needs a constant, has a very small margin for the wavering of that energy supply, doesn't it? Is that about right?
Well, that is correct, and of course, and the way the grid is designed to work, and you actually had a grid expert on recently, so I don't know. Well, I will get this wrong in comparison, at least to their level of expertise. But this, the grid matches the supply against the demand, and renewable doesn't really care about your demand. It supplies, as you say, when the sun is shining or the breeze is blowing. So batteries, as you say, is a way to buffer that.
Yes.
Exactly. And there are very good use cases for putting those batteries, all in a centralized location, off in one area. And there are some very good use cases for putting those batteries right beside the consumer, or the person that's going to use it fundamentally. When people do talk about like climate startups being only renewables and massive off-grid structures and stuff like that, that's true. But I have seen some interesting startups doing, much smaller sort of micro storage and micro energy generation, which you can start from sort of more of like a grassroots approach. You don't have to be a huge corporate institution. So that's one area. Another area that I see again is things like waste and packaging and stuff like that.
Yep.
There's loads of startups in this space. I mean, no doubt over the last 10 years, pretty much every product has been replaced by a bamboo variant and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we are getting more of them. They're getting more affordable. They're getting really cool. Meat replacements and stuff like that, or at least low meat replacements where there's still some, but less.
Yeah.
Again, that helps balance things out a little bit. Reduces the amount of cattle that's required. Novel materials. There's even some companies in London, one in an incubator that we're actually supporting at the moment, pro bono for this one. And they're replacing anti-static bags and anti-static foam for shipping things like electronics. So when you ship electronics, if they're static, that sort of thing, when you like rub your hair against a balloon, if they're static, it can go through the PCB, the printed circuit board, and ruin it before it even arrives,
So like when you're,
assembly.
A little analogy for the computer geeks out there, when you're swapping out like your RAM and you're supposed to like ground yourself or whatever before.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Anti-static bags and foam have existed forever, but they are inherently single use, right? You're shipping, and often each PCB is in its own little bag. And so when you're a company that does the final assembly and you're getting through 1 million units every month, you've probably got 1 million little bags kicking around, and foams and stuff like that as well. These are all made with obviously synthetic plastics, and there are startups. There's a startup in London that we're again supporting that is doing that all using biomaterials instead. And it's a very, very niche problem in a very niche field that the average person, maybe one or two of your listeners, viewers, will go, yeah, I've got some of those bags at home, those anti-static bags or whatever it is. Or I've understood your static RAM analogy there, but it's a specific problem that needs to be solved, and this is someone that I believe can really solve it. To circle back to what are the things that are exciting, I think, in climate at the moment, the startups I'm seeing are the ones where they've found a really niche problem, a unique or interesting, or at the very least clever way of solving that problem, and they're doing really great stuff in that space to actually solve it. You can go work for massive grid infrastructure and stuff like that and be a brilliant engineer and work in that space. But you don't have to be super hot on the grid and a super big engineer in that space to still make the world a cleaner and greener place. You can, we talked about that example of the robot on the beach and the roboticist actually going to work for a bioplastics company. It's the same thing. The person who set up this company actually isn't in the electronic space. She's actually in, her background is in biochemistry. And I think she did her PhD in like fungus and stuff like that.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, her work and her company, and there's a couple of them now, might hopefully in some small way transform how the PCB industry's impact on the climate.
Is really good. And I think that's what I find so fascinating about the energy sector. You go into it maybe as a newbie and you think this is simple. It's about the generation of power or electricity and the consumption of it or the transmission of it. But then you look and there's so many other sort of peripheral pieces to the puzzle. You've got the sustainability of products and how that plays into it, chemical science, life cycles and the circular economy. It's so much broader than just getting wind turbines to spin so that your kettle can be boiled. There's so many other facets to it. And I like what I found interesting what you were saying about there's a misconception that might need to be busted about going into energy or clean tech or climate tech. It isn't just about the big opportunities that are very kind of gate kept in terms of their regulation in building a wind farm, something as specific and as large as that as a venture. You've got all these other things that are a lot smaller that you can get a lot more niche with as well. Obviously, there is the opportunity and I guess incentive for a lot of founders that their solution might or their company might be bought out by one of those larger sort of corporate or institutional players in the long run. For the founders that you work with, how do you kind of see different incentives playing out for them in the long run, whether it be to get acquired, have an exit and sit and drink Mai Tais on the beach, or maybe put money into a larger venture? What do you see in founders in their incentive structure?
This entire conversation is sort of like a Mobius strip. This is exactly where that be married to the problem, not the solution thing comes into it. Because don't get me wrong, I think pretty much everyone, to some small part, loves the idea of having more money. I've not yet met anyone that's, God, I wish I had less money. There is, there is this allure, there is this argument, maybe noble, maybe not noble, but justifiable mentality of I am starting this company and I hope in at least some small way that I get rich off it, or at the very least can keep doing it, because if I can't afford food, I can't keep doing it. But the ones that come home super excited about the £1 million that they've just net versus the ones who come home and say, I solved the issue today, and the person that I was working with, the customer that was affected by it, whether it was a hard hat wearing builder or a farmer or someone that lives by the beach that's covered in plastic or whatever it is, someone that can't feed their families. It doesn't have to be something so deep and scary. Even just someone who used to spend 3 hours doing something and now spends 25 minutes doing something because you've made a software that's made it better or whatever it is. When someone comes home, when that founder comes home and says, I think I've made someone's life better today, that's really cool. Or the thing that I built has made someone's life better and I've seen that. That's when that energy shines through, that's what you live for, sort of thing.
Transcends just the financial benefit. It's like, did I actually contribute today? Did I make a difference? I want to segue onto something else for a second. Looking at the idea of every job in a green economy being a green job, with a focus on sustainability and renewable energy sources, you can do lots of things to be contributing to that outside of just being a technical person. Can you unpack that a bit for me?
Every single thing that you interact with in your entire life contributes in any large or small way to the planet, to the environment that you're with. And we're obviously in a room with cameras, with SD cards, with batteries, with things in them, with raw materials in them, with the energy that's used to power them, with the modes of transport that we use to get here. All those things in some big or small way will contribute to not just emissions, but to the environment as a whole. So you can be a camera expert, for example, and still think, how can I make this greener if you wanted to? And greener isn't necessarily just, how can I make it greener for greener's sake? Because I like hugging trees. It can be, how can I make this more efficient? And that is by definition, how can I make this greener? if you love to cook, you and you're a chef, you can even still think in that way of, okay, how can I make this food even more delicious while also actually being greener or maybe even cheaper ultimately, because a lot of that's the case.
Yeah.
I went to a event last night, an event called Climate Connection, and they host it at the Conduit, which is a space in central London. And I've been to a couple of these events, and a couple of these times they serve food at the event. And it took me about 3 or 4 events to realize that the food was all vegan. Like, the food was so good. And I'll eat meat sometimes, and I'll eat veggie and vegan sometimes, but it took me so long to realize, oh my God, this is actually all vegan. It's like really good. And what I suppose I'm getting with that is, you're not an engineer to engineer a new type of, barbecue sauce that made that food so tasty because it was barbecue sort of themed burger. You can apply it in your own specialism, your own skill set to contribute towards that problem that you care deeply about.
Okay, yeah.
If you want to, you're an accountant and you want to make the world a little bit greener, build more of the world that you want to see. Okay, go be an accountant for it doesn't have to be a startup, can be a corporate, but someone doing something green that you're proud of. If they're hiring, if you're able to move or if you're able to work with them, of course. But there are things that Joe Blogs, the average, can do. And sure, it's, purchasing habits and stuff like that. But if you're going to spend 8 hours a day doing something, and this is, your 9 to 5s, and obviously if you're a startup or a founder, if you're going to spend
your 5 to 9s,
whatever time, one of my favorite quotes is just, how are you going to use your time? 80 plus years on the planet, how are you going to use it? And, founders somewhat know that, or at least believe that they know that. Not always do. I'm guessing you do that as well, because you spend probably a ton of time putting these things together, probably more than a 9 to 5 and probably more than you thought you might have to when you first started. But you do it because you love it, and you do it because you care deeply about the problem. And as brilliantly technical as you can come off at times, you're not an engineer, are you? And yet you're, I think, moving the, if it's a massive tug of war, and on one side, there's all these people pulling towards the green side of things, maybe in ever so slightly different directions because of their different views of policy or tech or the thing that they care about.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, we're pulling in the same direction. And then on the other side, you've got a few bad apples, like pulling in deniers and stuff like that. But fundamentally, you're also just pulling, resistance to change, hysteresis and a rock that just refuses to move because this is how it's always been done. In any small way, exactly what you're doing, you can pull on this side, make it just a little bit greener, make it that bit cleaner. Engineers are the obvious one. Big renewable is the obvious one, but there are 1,000,001 different ways that you can actually start pulling on that.
Yeah, contribute.
Can I flip it? Can I ask you some questions?
Go for it.
Does anyone ever ask you questions, or
maybe every now and then?
Not
very frequently.
Okay,
but yeah, I'm open.
What got you into this?
Renewables or filmmaking?
Let's start with the latter.
Well, I picked up a camera about the age of 12 to first start taking photos of the artwork I was doing, because I was arty. And then I think I just got into photography as a medium. And I was doing a lot of macro photography in my early teens from like 12 onwards. It was like quite exciting that you could, like, with the right lens and the right camera, get really close and kind of show a whole new world, like getting like macro on a flower or something. You can make something that looks very impressive in an environment that was quite normal, like your back garden. So I just kind of fell in love with photography, and then in mid-teens got into video production, and it felt like the natural next step to explore the photographic medium further. It was what I was doing at school a little bit, and I just kind of, having entered the freelance world around that point for photography, also found that video was potentially a better long-term business plan, because video projects tend to be larger, they tend to be better paid, and there's more opportunity to just do more work, really. And so that's how I got into the creative space.
I love what you said about macro and applying it to like the flower, and finding something relatively mundane that you can find on the side of the pavement as you walk down the road, and actually find something incredibly beautiful and take such a good, macro photo of it that you can share it.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing here, right? You are finding maybe not the mundane startups, of course, or the mundane companies, but the companies that aren't talked about and maybe not the best at selling themselves, because obviously very few startups or very few companies do the best promotional videos. That's why you exist. But using the macro lens, as it were,
Yeah.
to really shine a light on what's really cool and making it exciting.
Yeah.
My favorite teachers at school, probably the same with you, were the ones that can make a really boring subject come alive. And I love that in that's really clear with like what you do, and this sort of work.
Also, digging further into that, find it kind of almost funny, enjoyable, but almost funny how you can make something look like a big deal. So, you know, with the concept of so even this podcast with CleanTalk, you know, it was just me sitting there in my bedroom with like Illustrator opened, making the cover art for the series or whatever. It's like you can, if you come up with a concept and you have good design skills at the end of the day, it comes down to in some perspective, you can flesh out an idea that with enough time and resource, it can become something that people actually get value out of. And I think particularly in media, people often have a hard time getting into it because they don't take themselves very seriously. Not that you should take yourself too seriously, but they feel a bit shy and they don't think they have much to contribute, or they feel like having a camera on them is embarrassing. This is, I think, going on a tangent slightly into the perspective of the UK on entrepreneurship. At least in my experience, you know, people don't have a lot of confidence. They don't think they can achieve something. There's almost, in certain communities, you know, a lot of shame associated with dreaming big or being vocal about what you think you can contribute to the world. What I have found has been that if you can kind of just gain self-confidence, share creative work, and not be afraid to like do stuff that people might just think you're a bit of an idiot for.
Yeah.
Be a bit of an idiot, you know, be vulnerable, create artwork, and silly content every now and then. I think there's an immense amount of personal growth to come from that.
One of the things I mentioned earlier on was build something, don't just start with a blank canvas. And I think that's kind of another way of sort of looking at what you've just said, in that when you have a blank canvas and you're telling everyone, I'm going to do this big thing one day, and you're telling the investors, you know, in my world, I need all this money because I'm going to do a big thing one day, and the design's going to be perfect when it comes out one day, and you never do it. It's scary to build something, you know, not very, you know, not polished and release it. There's this phrase in especially hardware, but in startups, which is you should be embarrassed by your first product, or at least by your first MVP. You should be a bit embarrassed by it. Not because you're not proud of the problem you're solving, but because a part of you kind of has to go, and again, it's the MVP thing, but part of you has to go like, but it's not polished. Like, it's not perfect.
You've got to let go of that pride, haven't you?
You've got to let go of your pride. Exactly. And I think it's actually something that the creative industry and creatives do far better, because I think from a young age you're encouraged, like, not everyone has to love your art, and build it for you, make it for you, and share it with the people that do resonate with it. And over time, you'll love it more. You'll get better because you're doing it more, and that sort of thing. Whereas I think something that engineering does wrong, and STEM actually does wrong a lot at school and at university, is it tells you that it is filled with right answers.
Right, yeah.
And then STEM students leave feeling there is a right answer and a wrong answer. And I really don't want to release this because it might be the wrong answer, and then I'll get a bad mark. Whereas with art and this sort of thing in the artist medium, you sort of just go, I'm going to release it, and people are going to tell me if it was right or not, but I'll iterate, I'll keep improving, I'll keep expressing myself, I'll keep making it. And I think if there are grey tie wearing engineers watching, I'd say just be a little bit more arty, be a bit more like you.
Yeah, I like that. I just want to refine that thought that I had about the joy and the humor of creating something and making it a real thing in the world. So what I was trying to say on that was part of the process for art, filmmaking, and marketing is about making people believe something's a big deal sometimes, or giving the brand the kudos that the product that it's representing actually already has, but people don't know about.
Yeah.
And so I think what I found through my kind of creative journey has been, if you can create cool work that has a bit of gravitas, it's almost funny to see people take it seriously.
It's the whole, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it actually fall, or did it make a sound? But you're the microphone. Yeah. You're the one saying, like, I've captured that. That's cool. Someone's doing something cool here.
And I think the vulnerability, again, to like fail and try something, like, and build in public, you know, share the journey of what you're doing, knowing that, you know, it might fail and you might do the wrong thing, but you can learn from that, is what's a really important facet to that.
Yeah. something that I'm really grateful for is that we met in person before we discovered each other on LinkedIn. I'm not saying you've got a bad LinkedIn presence or otherwise.
Yeah.
I'm saying this because very few startups will build in public, truly. And even fewer people will build themselves or their art or whatever it is in public. They will express all the times it's gone really well.
Yeah.
And they will not express all the times that it's gone poorly.
Mm.
And I'm a sucker for this. I think everyone's a sucker for this. No one's going to be like, I'm depressor espresso. I'm going to go on LinkedIn and write this out. But there is a bit of humility and a bit of like, even intelligent vulnerability in saying, this is what I'm struggling with at the moment. Some of the best relationships that I've fostered over the years and built over the years are because I've asked for help.
Yeah.
And been pleasantly surprised that they've said, yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah.
And unless you've got that sort of willingness to be a little bit exposed at times and say, I need help, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Which you just don't get on social media. You don't get on LinkedIn and that sort of thing. Yeah. So I just want to sort of compound that on yours. Now let's circle back to the former, because you asked the latter, which is, getting into
Sure.
media and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
The second part, which is the first part, but you get the idea, which is, okay, why specifically climate, green? What drew you to this?
Yeah. I'm going to recite Ikigai to you again. So it was not formally known to me at that point, I don't think, but the idea of looking at what did I want, what was enjoyable, what had good purpose or ethics behind it, what market was growing financially that I could tap into, and a few other things like I'm techie, I'm nerdy. I like learning new stuff in the tech space. So that was kind of the methodology behind why renewables. I decided to niche down Harma Visuals because niching, I was just coming across niching as a process for business development or a really good approach for business development online quite a lot. And I was like, I want to grow this business. I'm in the early startup phases, so to speak, of, having a skill set and wanting to build a company out of that. How do I make this work? How do I solve a specific problem at the end of the day and build a brand around that? And it struck me that the renewable energy space, as I learned more about it through the research process, had a wealth of opportunity to solve communications problems. And I think that's been a big realization has been there's so much disagreement, so much polarization in viewpoints and politicization around renewables. And there's so much disagreement between different people that all have a role to play in building the future of sustainable energy. And in order to get that future built, it isn't just a case of clever scientists working out how to make batteries for EVs more efficient or solar panels more efficient or anything like that. Or even on the political side, like get consent for different farms to be built. It's also, we need to have a cohesive narrative about where we're going as a society. And individual companies out there contributing to this future need to be able to communicate well in order to build it. And so I'm increasingly passionate about the fact that, that there is this incredible story playing out as a society with energy that needs to be told. And different viewpoints need to be given a spotlight. And I'm trying to do that through commercial video production and also through media brands like CleanTalk.
There are two parts where I loved all of it. But there are two parts that really resonated, which is there is this, we talked about earlier on about that climate isn't one thing. It's actually a million and one little problems that all need to be solved. And some of the big ones, like energy, for example, be it renewables, offshore, fusion, whatever it is, grid infrastructure, they do get talked about a little bit more because they're government backed, and this is fair. That they need to be talked about. They need to be government backed. They're huge projects. We're doing right things in that sort of space. But all of these little ones don't really get talked about.
Right.
I gave you the example of anti-static biomaterials company. Like, as far as I'm aware, no one's talking about that, right? And I'm going to sync you guys up after this because it's one of those things where it's a really niche problem that does need to be solved, that the right people need to hear about it.
Yeah.
And part of that is the average person. One of my favorite sort of 90s and noughties TV shows is How It's Made.
I remember that.
Like, how is a spring made and stuff like that. Like, and it shows you them. And you literally, I've never thought in my life, how is a whoopee cushion made? But then you watch the video and you think, oh my God, that's actually really cool. It's inspiringly cool of how they decided that we should make this megaton machine that does this, and B, that there's enough demand for this. But clearly, 7-year-old kids do have a massive problem that they can't make their parents sound like farts.
Yeah.
And so we do make enough of it. And, I think that's the other thing that you're doing well, but I think like we need this, which is it's not just solving the problem, it's talking about the problem so that other people who are affected by that problem can go, oh, the solution does exist. Nice.
Yeah.
I need to buy from them.
Yeah.
I need to work with them. So I love those like little niche problem things. The second thing is it's a bit optimistic, it's a bit hopeful, and arguably a bit pessimistic as well. I reckon in about 50 years, or at least I hope in about 50 years, that we don't talk about the climate anymore. That there isn't this thing as a green economy. There isn't this thing as a climate emergency. We don't talk about things in terms of sustainability because we just are. We don't talk about oxygen all the time because it's just there. We're fine with that, right? And we don't talk about actually we talk about the rain all the time in the UK, but you get the idea. And, you said the other, part of the, I'm going to quote Ikigai again, but the other part of the reason that you chose this was it was a noble cause, an area you saw growth, an area that you're good at, but also an area that there was financial growth and was booming and going to get better.
Yeah.
I think every product, for that future where we don't talk about it to exist in 50 years, every product is going to be green. Everything we do is going to be green, or at least as damn near close to it as we can be. And we have a lot to do. We have a lot to build between now and then. There are a lot of problems left to solve, a lot of infrastructure to build, a lot of great ideas to come up with, and a lot of people to lead those ideas into things that actually become normal for people.
Yeah.
And we need those people to hear about it. We need those people to be excited about it. We need those people to champion those ideas around it. And so again, going back to like, anyone can contribute to this. You don't have to be an engineer. You don't have to be technical. Anyone can contribute to this. This is exactly it. In 50 years, the world, if we play our cards right, in 50 years, the world is going to be cleaner. It's going to be greener. It's going to be better. What are we doing today? And how are we playing those cards to get to that point?
Yeah.
That's the hope.
Matt, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We're going to wrap up with what we call quickfire curiosity, which is our short trivia to end the episode off with.
Nice.
Kind of recapping your philosophy and your, I guess, advice for listeners, really. First of which question is, what does futurism mean to you as a word?
Build the world that you want to live in. If the world isn't as green as you want it to be, spend your time making the future a bit greener. If the world isn't as nice as you want it to be, spend your time making it a bit nicer. If there aren't as many whoopee cushions in the world as you'd like it to be, you get the idea. I don't think it's this inevitability that things will get better. I think it's this strife and effort that we have to put ourselves through to use our time well to make the future what we want it to be.
If you were flown back to when you had just left uni, you've just finished your master's, you're going headfirst into your career, what advice would you have given yourself looking back at how your career has panned out?
Of course, there are things that I've learned along the way that I'd love to have learned then. But it's sort of like the paradox of, well, if I knew it then, I wouldn't have learned the lesson.
Yeah.
I think the last 8-10 so years, there's been mistakes and things that I actually didn't enjoy, and things that in hindsight, or at least in the momentary hindsight, I was like, oh, I wish I didn't do that, or oh, that backfired, or that sucked, or that breakup sucked, or whatever it was, that moment of low. That's failure. I've said, I think, like 5 times already in this podcast, like, failure is good. You need that. You need to learn that. If anything, I would have been ballsier. I've done more failures. Imagine how much further along I could be.
Fail faster. Love it. For people listening in that are at a critical juncture in their educational career, they're looking for a change, or maybe they have a change being served up to them that they haven't asked for. I don't know. What questions would you encourage them to ask themselves to inform their decision making?
Well, number one, know that it gets better if the decision has been made for someone else, or by someone else. I would say, where possible, as I say, do stuff that matters to you. The rationale, actually, and this is the exact phrasing I used when I decided to leave my previous job and then start this company, was I go to bed every single night tired, with a little bit of a headache, and laying down aching and stressed and all, knackered.
Yeah.
And I want to get to a point where I don't want to remove that from my life. right? I don't want to go to bed relaxed and comfy and cozy and have a proper 9 hours extra sleep and lie and stuff like that. I still want to be stressed. I still want to have those, little headaches. I still want to be tired, but I want to lie down every single evening and think, worth it.
Yeah.
And if you feel that, or if you felt that and you want to get it again, that's great. You know what it's like. And if you don't feel that yet, just it might not be the next job. It might not be the thing that you get straight after uni. Sometimes it takes time to find it. But I think that's a worthy, noble pursuit. And that's exactly what Build Stuff That Matters is. It's not Build Stuff That Matters. You shouldn't build stuff that matters to you. For me, build stuff that matters to you. This matters to you, and you can tell through your passion of it.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us on CleanTalk today. I've loved speaking to you and learning more about that that startup trenches in the trenches. The importance and vitality of physical products and services in addition to software. And just your passion for tech, sustainability, and helping people confront honestly how they can do what they actually set out to do in the first place, which is solve a problem. So thank you so much for joining me. Where can people go if they're feeling like they need some technical support for their startup at the moment?
I mean, technical support, go to hard-stuff.com. We throw a dash in there for good measure, but it's hardstuff.com. We've also got LinkedIn. I'm sure it'll be linked in the show notes below, whatever it is. So yeah, I'd start there. I always do this part in that, there are so many issues, there are so many problems. If we can't fix it, I'm sure we'll know someone that can, and we're always happy to make intros.
And you work globally around the world?
We're trying to focus more on the UK, to be honest, at the moment. Only really because there are some great startups here. We work with some local incubators here. We have worked with startups in the US and around Europe as well, and we're still open to that. What I love is being able to go on site and see it there and actually work on the tech there. And it's just a bit cleaner and greener and cleaner to do it locally.
Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Really good fun. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for listening into this episode of CleanTalk. If you want to see more episodes, you can click the link to my right. And if you want to find out more about how we as Harma Visuals can support you with your storytelling objectives in renewable energy, head over to harmavisuals.com/services to learn more there. Thanks for listening and see you next time.